Hello, Whistler Vegan Festival. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Amy Soranno. I'm an animal rights activist based out of Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada. I am an undercover investigator. I give talks and workshops on animal rights and civil disobedience. And I'm an organizer of mass protests and events, namely Meet the Victims, which was here in Abbotsford, British Columbia last year, where 200 activists occupied the inside and outside of a pig farm, Excelsior Hog Farm, including Zoe. And we were both arrested at that farm. So that's me, and I'll hand it over to Zoe.
So my name is Zoe Peled. I am a Vancouver-based animal activist. I run a few projects here at the Vancouver Vegan Resource Center. I am a co-organizer for the Vancouver March to Close All Slaughterhouses, and I am a community and multi-events organizer. And I've been an activist about the same time that I've been vegan, which is just over 10 and a half years. Amy and I have been chatting, and what we're going to examine today is basically comprised of three parts. So we're going to look at the history of the animal rights movement. We're going to look at the current state of the animal rights movement. And then the third piece, we're going to talk about a few tangible call to actions for all of you folks about where we think the movement needs to go and how collectively we can work to get there. It is imperative that we consider the history, not because we need to mimic every single thing that was done. More so, we can look at the history of any movement. We can analyze the things that were successful. We can choose to omit the things that were not successful, and we can take the things from history that we can learn from and implement them into what you and I and all of our fellow community members are doing as animal activists. We're going to talk primarily about the animal rights movement in a Western lens. That is not to say that the animal rights movement is not growing and thriving and has been ever present in other parts of the world for a very long time. It just means that at this time, there is the most information available when we look at animal rights within the US, the UK, and Canada. And we can both agree that the majority of our lived experiences thus far as animal rights activists have been within Canada. If we look way, way, way back, okay, and this is talking about 4th and 6th century BCE, we can trace some of the philosophy of animal rights back to that time. But we're going to talk specifically about the modern animal rights movement. Many historians and many people who write about it will cite 1975 as the year that things really, really picked up and got going. And this is because 1975 is the year that Peter Singer published Animal Liberation. The publishing of Animal Liberation was major because, number one, it had the word liberation in the title. Number two, it was one of the first mainstream books that actually talked about the word speciesism. So all of a sudden, the book is published. It gets tons of attention, and it really serves as the spark to instigate a lot of personal action, to bring in a lot of people to the movement, and to get a lot of groups off the ground. And that spark picked up all the way through the 70s and kept on going. So we have Ronnie Lee officially naming the ALF, which would eventually spread to 20 plus countries, and as you and I know, is still quite a force to be reckoned with.
Mm-hmm.
Henry Spiro in the US, who organized more than 400 groups. More than 400 groups.
Unreal.
Unreal. Beyond, organizing 10 groups is a feat, let alone 400.
Goals.
The coalition that he organized was the Coalition to Help Stop the Dray's Rabbit Blinding Test, which was a campaign that ran for several years and was very successful. We see Paul Watson leaving Greenpeace in the late 70s because he felt that as an organization, their approach was much too passive and they were much too complicit with activism. That energy and that approach and all of the above, which we could define as direct action, continued all throughout the 80s, all throughout the 90s. We have huge liberations happening. We have the biggest US liberation to date, which was over 10,000 mink. We have the Animal Liberation League. They're based in the UK, and their approach to direct action was really bold in that they walked in the middle of the day. They believed in gaining access with very minimal impact, and they walked in and they took out animals. They would sometimes dress up as employees, for example, and just bypass other folks who were working at the facility. We see this pattern, and we can really identify the common threads. Fast forward a little bit to the mid 2010s and the late 2010s, closer to where we are today. These are the years where individuals like James Aspey started to become more familiar. This is when Earthling Ed started to gain a lot of traction. Joey Carbstrong and the like. So all of these individuals appeared. They appeared on social media, and this is really where they took steam. And this created a big shift within the movement, because these individuals were doing incredible work on social media and raising awareness, but the extent of their action and their calls to action for their followers were primarily based around the use of social media and the use of street outreach, for some more than others. So if you are hypothetically an activist who comes to social media in one of these years, if you are not as much of a history buff as you and I may be, this is going to be your first tangible example of what an animal rights activist looks like. And therefore, if you choose not to look beyond social media, as many do, that is going to dictate how you as an activist choose to do your activism. And this brings us to the current state and what we're chatting about, and a few things that we need to be critical of and aware of, and a couple of questions. Number one, what is the current state of the animal rights movement? Number two, where did all the direct action go? It's here, as you and I know, having participated in it, but there's not as much. Is it still happening, or are we just not seeing it? And number three, when did we become, as activists and as members of a movement, so reliant on social media to carry out our activism?
It's so interesting, isn't it, seeing this sort of wave of direct action and civil disobedience, and then more complacent, almost passive activism. And we do see throughout history how it kind of does come in these waves, and they're kind of coupled together. But in recent modern history, there was so much reliance on direct action and civil disobedience and animal rights activism. And then it seemed like with the shift of social media and with those few people who kind of came into popularity, everything became almost vegan activism instead of animal rights activism. And I think that that's really important to talk about and to distinguish the two, because as you said, if you're someone who became vegan and became an activist recently, and as a result of social media, the two kind of get confused. People can't really understand the difference or see the difference. So I think vegan activism is someone who is asking someone to go vegan. It's activism that is aiming at raising awareness, spreading education, and asking people to go vegan. Animal rights activism is fighting for the liberation and freedom and rights of animals. And for some reason, we're not seeing that anymore. We're fighting very heavily on individual change as opposed to systemic change, whereas years ago with ALF and so many other amazing organizations, they were fighting for system changes and they were fighting for the rights of animals. But now we're not really seeing that happen. Of course, I have to mention that there are individuals and there are organizations who are doing systemic work. They are doing animal rights activism, but we're talking about the majority here. So the majority of activism that we're seeing happen, that is animal rights activism, isn't actually animal rights activism anymore. It's vegan activism. So has that shift been positive? Is that a good thing? Is that not a good thing? I think we need to unpack this and think about it a little bit more. Is vegan activism effective? One big problem that stands out to me is that you can't measure the impact. So say you're doing street outreach, or you're standing in a protest holding a sign that's aimed to raise awareness, or doing banner drops, or you're doing anything that's aiming at telling people why they should go vegan. You can't measure the effectiveness of that. I have spent many years and many hours doing street outreach, and I really had no idea if any of the people that I interacted with have gone vegan. Even if it's an incredible conversation where they told me, yeah, I'm going to leave and go vegan, I really have no idea.
It's safe to say that none of us do, unless in a rare circumstance we were able to get that individual's contact information.
Mm-hmm.
I have the email address of one gentleman that I talked to many years ago, and we've kept in touch. He is now vegan, and we've been communicating the whole time. But you can't do that with every person that you meet on the street.
No, and so many forms of vegan activism. I know we talk a lot about street outreach because that is a primary form right now, but even things like billboards and, there's no actual contact that you're having with anyone. It's just kind of planting seeds, and you're hoping that those seeds grow. And it also, vegan activism relies entirely on people caring enough to change their entire lifestyle. And as much as we would like to believe that everyone deep down does care, there's going to be a huge majority of people who just don't care. No matter how much information we show them, no matter how much footage we show them,
it's
not going to happen. So vegan activism is still giving them a choice. We're saying, here's the information. What are you going to do with that? Are you going to change your lifestyle? Whereas animal rights activism takes away that choice. So I think that's really important to think about. But let's say you're a vegan activist and you are the most incredible vegan activist and you're able to convince so many people to go vegan. Is that still having a big enough effect and impact on animals? Are we able to have enough one-on-one effective conversations with people to get them to go vegan in order to change our nearly 8 billion population on this planet? I think focusing so heavily on that one tactic and that one strategy of go vegan activism is a little bit unrealistic. I don't think we're going to achieve that. The world isn't going to go vegan by having conversations. That being said, we are seeing, and since the rise of social media influencers and activists, and a heavy reliance on that, we have seen a huge jump in the population of vegans worldwide. And we're seeing huge growth in vegan celebrities and plant-based alternatives, and we are seeing a huge rise in that. So in that sense, this activism is working.
Something's happening, but it's not everything.
Yeah, something's happening there. And so I think we often see the movement celebrating a lot and say, oh, look at these wins, look at these wins. So there are wins happening. There is something happening there. But we need to be critical because simultaneously we're also seeing the number of animals being bred into existence, used, abused, and killed rising, and rising significantly by the billions each year. That's due to a few things. As in the West, there is a decrease in pig and cow flesh consumption, there is an increase in chicken flesh consumption, eggs, and fish. We're also seeing a rise in all animal consumption and all animal product consumption in other countries overseas. And even though in the West we are seeing a decrease in some animal product categories, our government is jumping in to bail out the animal agriculture industry with subsidies, grants, and tax breaks that are unbelievable to bail the industry out. So although demand is decreasing, they're still getting paid. So there's no longer a supply and demand chain anymore. It's completely been disrupted. And vegan activism relies entirely on trying to dismantle supply and demand. So what we're doing is kind of a moot point. It's not really working. If our goals as activists are to create more incredible plant-based alternatives and awesome vegan products, then we're killing it. We're doing a good job. If our goals are to achieve animal liberation, achieve rights for animals, we are failing big time. So where do we go from here?
Well, that's the question. And I was actually having a similar conversation with an activist this week. And one of the ways that we were able to kind of parallel this discussion is veganism, not on every level, but on most level. It's about getting you to think differently about food and where your food is coming from. But it's a lot about your grocery list. Whereas animal rights activism is asking you to shift and redefine every single thing that you have thought about animals possibly throughout your entire life.
The veganism thing is tricky because I think even the general population, if you ask people, what is veganism? What is a vegan? They look at it as a diet. They're not thinking about the exploitation of animals for entertainment, for clothing, for testing. They're not thinking about everything else. They're not thinking about the rights for animals or liberating animals. They're thinking about a human's personal choice to eat or not eat someone, in their eyes, something. So there are more vegans than ever before, but we're killing more animals than ever before. And I think history is important here. And I think this is where, as activists, if we are fighting for animals, not just fighting for more people to go vegan, the two should go together, but they're not. And we need to recognize that. And I think we need to get frustrated. We need to be angry as activists that more animals are dying despite our relentless efforts. So we need to go back to the drawing board, reassess what we're doing, what's working, what's not working, and figure it out. I think a big part of that is going back to system change, eliminating the individual changes, eliminating the vegan activism, going back to true animal rights activism, and really putting the focus back on animals. As you said, when people think about veganism or vegan activism, it's a lot about the grocery list. So let's eliminate that. Let's take food out of the picture. Let's talk about rights for animals and truly fight for that on a legal and political level. Because right now, asking people to go vegan will not magically create rights for animals, and we are not challenging our legal and political systems. So therefore, nothing's changing for them, unfortunately. It's interesting that throughout history, there are so many different creative tactics that were used and so many different strategies, but now with social media and with street outreach, we're just utilizing those two tactics. And we're just utilizing the one strategy of go vegan activism. So I think we need to get more creative. I think we do need to look at history and look at all the really epic, cool things that they have done and pick apart what worked and what didn't work, or what inspires you and what doesn't, and go from there. Try something new. I talk to a lot of people about, why aren't you getting involved in activism? And they say, oh, well, I get social anxiety. I struggle with having conversations with strangers. That feels very uncomfortable for me. I can't remember all the different facts to have a really effective conversation. And I'm like, wait a second. Activism doesn't just mean street outreach. It doesn't just mean having a conversation or convincing someone to go vegan. It's so much bigger than that. And that's arguably the most ineffective form of activism. So,
and that, I mean, that response from folks is directly related to this device. And the aforementioned note about complacency, and I'm not putting blame on them, because I think it's a more societal shift and
Yes.
issue. But I think when it comes down to it, so many people use this as the be all end all and don't always strive beyond that.
Another point that I had was taking our activism from online to offline. We do live in a world where it's so social media driven. So I do think it's important that we utilize that, even exploit that as much as we can.
100%. Yeah.
But that can't be the end all be all. This movement needs more numbers. As we know throughout history, there is power in numbers, and what created change is mass movements. And right now, the animals are strongly lacking numbers when it comes to protests, when it comes to civil disobedience and direct action. And we would be able to achieve so much more if more people were participating. I would also challenge what I refer to as popcorn activism. So it's kind of these one-off protests or events where, say, you hear something is happening in your city, like there's a rodeo coming to town or something like that. And then it's like, oh yeah, let's all go down there and hold signs. I think the presence is great, and I think it says something socially, and it kind of makes a stand, but it's not very effective. Unless we have very clear goals and strong tactics that will help us achieve those goals effectively, it's not really doing anything. I think we need to move away from that sort of popcorn activism and, just wanting to do something. I totally understand feeling helpless a lot and just wanting to do something. Yeah, like it's really, really difficult. We live with the weight of all those animals, billions of animals every day dying. And we just want to do something. So if something pops up, we want to do something. But we can be more effective with our time and our energy to create real tangible goals for animals, not just raise awareness. So if we move away from this popcorn activism and focus more effort on campaigning and creating campaigns that have clear goals that are tangible and attainable, and we utilize so many different tactics in order to achieve those goals, then we're achieving something. We're setting goals and we're killing them instead of just, planting seeds and putting it out there and hoping something sticks.
Goals, and I would also say an important term that we need to keep in mind all the time is also strategy. So that rodeo protest that you used as an example, if hypothetically that protest was part of a very long-standing and carefully thought out campaign to perhaps close that rodeo and or at least demand that all of the animals used in the rodeo are removed, then that would be a very different story. Whereas when you dive in, you have, one piece of popcorn activism, and then that's the end. How has that impacted the conversation if there was no goal to begin with?
Or even if it is like a popcorn protest, you can go about it more strategically. You could utilize direct action. You could utilize civil disobedience, chain the doors shut, do something in order to prevent that event from even taking place. And really get that conversation going, because I think when people are arrested or are taking such a strong stand for something, it generates a more powerful conversation around why would someone be so passionate about that? What is actually going on to these animals, as opposed to, oh, look at those protesters standing outside. It's something that people have just become accustomed to and they're used to it, and we're just kind of annoying now. Strategy, that's so, so important, and I think we've kind of lost that. And taking initiative. People are just kind of following these organizations that are doing street outreach or doing random protests, and people are feeling good that they're doing that activism, but I think we do need to think critically, and that's okay. It's okay to assess our actions and be like, shoot, what I've been doing for the past 5-10 years hasn't really achieved a whole lot. It's time to go back to the drawing board.
Well, and I would also say not only is it important to look critically at our actions, but in doing so, it does not mean that every single thing that we have done up to this point has been negative or futile. it doesn't negate the incredible work that has been done by activists who may choose to use this as their primary tool and outlet. It just means that we have an obligation to look beyond it. And as we are doing here, consider impact. And if we are not having the type of impact we want to achieve for animals, something is not happening that needs to be happening.
Ultimately, everyone listening, everyone participating in activism, we need to really think hard about what are we trying to achieve by going to protests, by being an activist. What are we wanting to accomplish? Are we truly vegan activists? Are we animal rights activists? If we are animal rights activists, or if we want to be in the future, we need to be challenging the system. We need to be challenging our legal and political systems and the systems that exploit, oppress, and kill animals, and we need to dismantle them. That's not something that's being done very much right now. Very much. Of course, there are people doing that, but very few people are doing that. We need more. And in order to create huge change for animals and to hopefully disrupt that curve that's just going straight up with the animals being killed, we need to get that to go back down. And in order to do that, we need to address the system, not just individuals. So I will give the floor back to Zoe.
Yes. So that leaves us with the questions of how do we do that? So for animal rights activists watching today, for someone who perhaps before would have primarily identified as a vegan, or maybe someone who is plant-based and wants to now make the shift into more of an animal rights role, what are some things that you can do? Some of them we have spoken about and touched on, but we have some additional ones that we've spoken about. So number one, abandon the idea that your activism needs to be inherently tied to an established group. So if you're someone and your foray into activism has been putting in time with a group that already exists, that is fine. What we're saying is realize that your role within the movement is not tied to them. If you want to do something on your own, if you want to start your own group, if you don't want to be in a group, those are all options for you. Number two, the big S word and the G word that we talked about before. So that is strategy and its goals. Establish at the beginning of a campaign what the end goal is of the campaign and what the strategy is that's going to get you there. So that means that every decision, every action, every social media post, every phone call, every single protest has been premeditated and is part of that strategy moving toward.
I think that's so important because I think so often with activism, it's kind of in the opposite. People look at the tactics like, ooh, let's go and, do this sort of disruption, or I saw this on Instagram, let's go replicate that. But they're not thinking about the goal. They're not starting with the goal first and working their way backwards. They're kind of doing it the other way around, which ends up being kind of messy.
Messy, very, very, very messy.
Yeah.
Number three, as we are doing with each other and with the folks who are watching as part of the Veg Fest, is connect with other activists in the area. I acknowledge that right now we are navigating some very unique times in that some of us are not able to leave our houses, some of us are not able to be face-to-face. So when you are, I really would encourage people to meet activists. Find out who is in your community. Find out who wants to do similar things that you want to do. Because if you are going to plan a strategy, if you're going to have a direct action, you need support and you need to know who is on the same page and who is interested in also pursuing those similar facets to you. Number four, we know the importance of this, and that is to know your rights. If you are going to be embarking on things like direct action, if you are going to be involved in liberation missions and so forth, know your
Which you should.
which you should, which we officially, I believe, are endorsing
Yes,
in this video.
100%.
Know all of your rights. Know your rights. Access information before you carry out your action. And I would also add a point to that and say ensure that the people who are in your group, your team, or who are participating in the action also know their rights and are informed 100%. Number 5, vigils, truck stoppings, street outreach. These are all things that we do not wish to speak ill about because they do have impact in some capacity, and for many, they are an entry point into the movement. And I know for me, they definitely were.
They were for me too.
Yeah. I would say maybe for the majority of us.
Yeah.
And I would say we acknowledge their role, but similar to looking beyond our phones when it comes to activism, we need to look beyond established groups and organizations and realize that they are not the be all end all for the activism that we want to be doing within the movement. So for folks who want to learn more and who want to continue the conversation, where do they find you and how do they get in touch with you?
I'm all over social media, and you can email me. My name is Amy Soranno again, so that's my last name's Soranno. Well, I think we'll probably put it on the screen somewhere so everyone can see.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you type in my name, that's Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Amy Soranno at outlook.com is my email. And yeah, please, if you have questions or you want to get involved or anything, email me, reach out, and let's keep the conversation going because this is so important. What about you, Zoe?
Full transparency, my preferred platform is definitely Instagram. So I am on Instagram as Zoe Marg, Zoemarg. I would say connect with me there, and then if someone prefers to hop onto email or have a phone conversation, I am in support of that. And I really want to echo what you said in encouraging people to reach out, encouraging people to ask questions, and encouraging people to ask for support, because we're talking about a very, very, very major movement here, and there is no one perfect entity. We're always learning, we're always shifting, and we're always transforming. And asking questions, having conversation is a very essential part of that process and that growth.
Huge. And I will say too, if you're someone who is very eager and very interested in direct action and civil disobedience and going the more illegal route, which I 100% encourage, that's something that I speak about a lot. I think that that is one of the most effective, if not the most effective, forms of activism, especially if we look throughout history and how other movements achieved change. It was through mass civil disobedience. So if that's something that you want to discuss further, or say you have an idea and you want to run it past us, I highly suggest you download the apps WhatsApp or Signal, and you can reach, I believe, both me and Zoe through there. You can reach out to find our phone numbers, and then we can chat through there because those are encrypted apps.
I'd like to thank everyone for attending virtually. And I would say for tuning in and being open to the conversation, and also open to reflecting on what they have been doing as individuals and how it could be more impactful, because I think that reflection is challenging to do sometimes.
It can be uncomfortable, and I know I've had this conversation with quite a few activists, And it does kind of stir up some emotions or defenses, even. And it can just be like this weird, almost icky thing to talk about. But I think it can be so positive if we look at the things that we can change and move towards that can be more effective. And if we can do that collectively together, that's just, there's so much power in that and so much strength in that. And this can be really, really exciting. So, yes, thank you so much to everyone for watching. And thank you, Whistler Vegan Fest, for having us on and having this conversation. Yeah, it's been really fun. Thanks so much.
Thank you.